The only people for me are the mad ones.
The world is filled with the boring and the barely conscious.
And misery loves company.
But we don't have to live this way.
Jessica and I are here to talk to those the system rejects, to radicals and thought criminals.
The ones who never yawn or say a commonplace thing, but push the boundaries of acceptable discourse.
Those who stare reality in the face and dare it to be different.
History isn't made by the timid, and fun is not had by the perpetually afraid.
We are the mad ones.
So let's get to it.
Welcome to the Mad Ones. I don't know if you can tell, but my children have destroyed my glasses, and I've definitely glued them together, and it's not going to drive me crazy all night. Host, Cam Harless, and with me as always is your humble nurse who takes care of her poor husband anytime he trips over the dog hostess, Miss Jessica Green.
That's true. I am so very humble.
I am so dumb, though, because I forgot to put us in before that video went out. So there's just this little pause of nothingness. Okay. And, I'm tired. I've had a lot going on. My glasses are broken. You can't fault me for this.
Just to be fair to us, everybody, we both quit smoking. So this is our quit smoking episode. And our guest is still a smoker. So he's going to torture us the whole time with it.
I did.
And I encourage that.
I did buy more nicotine because I was so mean.
The betrayal.
I was so mean to my wife, Jessica.
Oh, no, you can't be mean to your wife. She's so nice.
Okay. Joining us tonight is one of the boyos. You may know him from Twitter as a chaos-bringing laser-eyed dog. He's a mad scientist in the mountains and a former worker in psych wards. The man once known as Cholera Fan, Mr. Chris Amidon. How you doing?
How's it going?
So the reason I asked you to come on is because not that long ago in our Twitter group chat, we were talking about something, and you had said something about how mental illness was essentially a myth and that you could destroy psychiatry. And I went, okay, so I've never heard someone say that who wasn't a Scientologist. And so this piqued my interest because, usually it's the crazy people. Let me just say, before we get into that and your history and what you do or what you've done or what you did, I don't know. One time I went and visited my brother in Los Angeles, and he comes to me and he says, "Hey, do you want to go to the Death Museum?" And I was like, well, of course I want to go to the Death Museum. That's a stupid question. I want to go. But what he didn't tell me was that it wasn't actually a death museum. It was a museum called Psychiatry, an Industry of Death, and it's a Scientologist front. And so it's an entire museum, and you walk through and you see these different little exhibits and videos that talk about how psychiatry is bad and how psychiatry is what led to 9/11 and Hitler and all of this. And I was just like, wow, this is nuts, and everyone needs to check this out. But that was like my firsthand Scientologist anti-psychiatry situation. But you actually worked in a psych ward. And so when you said this and you have this firsthand knowledge and this firsthand experience with psych wards, I want to hear about that. What did you do was it a psych ward? Am I saying, is that correct? Or was it just okay.
Yeah, it was in a crisis stabilization unit in Tampa. It was an inner city nonprofit. And then later on, I was in a private facility. It was still a Baker Act facility. Baker Act is when you're brought in by the police involuntarily. And in Orlando, I worked there too, but it was a private institution, but we still had, a lot of, you had to take in the Baker Act people or whatever. So, for about a decade and a half, I don't remember exactly, probably a little over a decade. I worked in them as like lower level, and then I went to school. I got my degree, and then I worked a little higher level. And then I eventually had to leave because I couldn't really handle it. I couldn't be a part of it anymore. So.
What was your degree in?
Psychology.
Psychology? Okay. So
Yeah, I
having
wanted to be a psychologist back then, but after working further, I abandoned that.
okay.
Just real quick, when you said that they said that psychiatry is responsible for 9/11, it reminded me of that Twitter account, every word did 9/11. So it'd be like women did 9/11,
Yep.
school buses did 9/11, and so in this case it's psychiatry did 9/11. So
There is actually the 9/11 is preposterous, but there actually, I happen to have this book right here because I was like, oh, I'm going to be talking about it later. I have not read this book yet. Oh, you can't even see it because of the light.
there you go.
Psychiatrist, the men behind Hitler. So this is a whole thing written by German doctors back in the 90s who postulated that really, and there was a lot to do with psychiatry and Hitler. I mean, even the American eugenics movement here was really revolved around psychiatry, and they kind of modeled their whole system after that. But
So
no,
we need
obviously it's preposterous.
So we need a Twitter account that says every word created Hitler. So it can be Scientology created Hitler, psychiatry created Hitler.
Yep.
I don't know. Get on that, guys.
When you came to the conclusion, as you said in our message, when I was like, okay, I want to talk about this, which is that mental illness is a myth. Was it from experience in your time in the psych ward, or was it like studying the history of psychiatry? What was it that
It was both. It was both,
Okay.
plus my own struggle. I know I'm coming out of a podcast and I'm going, it's a myth that mental illness, whatever, but I am severely depressive. I've been dealing with my whole life since I was a little kid. And I can explain more later why I think that I'm still depressive, and I think it was created by the medications that were designed to treat me. But it's both from my experience in the mental health field. I've been on 30 plus medications that didn't do anything for me. And then most people that go into psych are crazy themselves. Most people. I mean, everybody I've ever met. But I mean, most people are a little crazy in general, but I don't know, with psych, it's because a lot of people really want to help themselves, and they do, a lot of them. But then there's a lot of people like me who go in there looking for an answer, and then you realize that the whole system is really not going to help you at all.
Okay. That is, I will say, I have to agree with you on the kind of idea that a lot of people who go into psychiatry or psychology are typically damaged people, because I've yet to meet someone who is in that field or is chasing after that field who is not just a mess, just like an absolute mess.
Yeah, but I kind of think that's how it should be, though, also. Like, you don't want some, like, those weird people. I know none of them are here, but the weird people who everything's always been okay and they just dance through life and there's no problems.
Oh,
You don't want that person telling you how to run. You don't even, get out of here. You know what I mean?
That makes sense.
Well, those aren't real people.
No.
Their personalities aren't real
robots.
for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you hear a lot today about people saying, go to therapy, go to therapy, go to therapy, but you never hear about the after effects or people who had bad experience with therapists and therapy. So that's something I'm actually kind of interested in talking about, because more often than not, I hear about people having bad experiences with therapists.
Well, and let me just insert in there the fact that the people that I've known very closely who have told me that I need to go to therapy are like, somehow they have become worse, as in, like, they're not people that I want to speak to anymore. Like there's this, so I won't give any specific examples because I don't want to put anyone on blast, but I've had a couple of friends who have told me, hey, you should check out therapy. Therapy is good for everyone. But when they came out of therapy, they became so mindless and compliant. Like they went through this therapeutic cycle. They have their person they talk to every week. They have the drugs that this person gives them. And then when you talk to them, there's almost no one in the house anymore. It's just empty windows.
The lights are on, but nobody's in there.
I don't have a problem with therapy per se, although I think that there's a lot of bad therapists out there. And I think that Robin Dawes wrote a book, House of Cards, that kind of takes down the whole talk therapy efficacy. It's not as efficacious as we'd like, but there's a few talk therapies that I like, acceptance and commitment therapy and REBT, and a few of them that are really useful tools that people can use to get better. And it's not really about therapy per se. Most psychiatrists have no idea about any kind of therapy or about how the human mind works or anything. They just know how much.
Okay. So here's something maybe you can clarify for me, because I associate when you say psychiatry and therapy, I lump them in together. Like, what's the difference?
Well, psychiatrists typically, when I was on the unit, okay, the psychiatrist sees new patients for 5 to 15 minutes, and they go through their history. They ask them a couple questions, and then they're like, "Here's your diagnosis. Here's the drug that you're going to take."
Right.
A therapist is someone who you kind of build a rapport with, and over time they can help you, teach you skills on how to lessen your symptoms, or reach further than you would have reached because you don't know how to. A lot of people just weren't really, even if you are raised by great parents, they might not have taught you the skills you really need to succeed in life, and not just about balancing your budget or whatever, but like about mindfulness and like about emotions and like how to interact with people and things like that. And so therapists, they do a lot of good work doing that. There's a lot of bad therapists out there, but there's some amazing ones out there. So it's not really psychologists or therapists that I have a problem with. It's more psychiatry as a discipline. There's no real reason for it to exist.
Okay, so I definitely want to get into that. What I'm going to say, though, is just the people that are telling me that they should go to therapy, it's also been paired with psychiatry and with diagnosis.
I just want to go on the record. Cam should definitely go to therapy.
I'm perfect. You shut your mouth. So
help with that.
So talk to me
how
about
awful would it be to be perfect? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I mean, it's pretty great. I mean,
it just seems like a lot of pressure.
Well, here's the trick. When you feel like you're going to be sad, just choose to be awesome instead, and it's all good from there. Yeah. It's easy.
Wait, are you a therapist? Are you a therapist? I've heard this before.
But look, so you said that part of it. So I want to get some of the fun stuff out of the way, because when someone says they worked in a psych ward, I kind of want to know some of the weird stories or some of the weird things that they've experienced. Are there any that you would feel comfortable sharing, or are there any that are just like, wow, this was really screwed up, and something like that? Was there anything that really left with you when you went home?
I don't know.
Regale us.
Not really. It's just a constant steady stream of the same sad people and the same sad lives. And I worked in a unit with just kids and adolescents for a long time, and I could not do that for very long because, man, that is depressing. But it's really just, one day I don't remember if it was broken. I think I sprained my wrist or whatever, trying to subdue someone that was attacking someone else. There's constant threats of violence or whatever, but for the most part, it's just sad people, and they are in the worst time of their lives, and they come into this place where the place is getting paid money to just drug them up and send them back out there. But there's not really a lot of fun stories. It's just a lot of sad. I've held 400-pound ghetto black dudes like schizophrenic, and they're just sitting there and I'm holding them and they're sobbing, and it's just that's what it's like. It's not like I don't know. There's not a lot. There was one guy who used to write letters to the president in crayon all the time, but then he got sent to the state psych facility, and that guy was kind of funny, but also he was a really bad sex pervert or whatever. He had a lot of sex crimes and stuff, so he was a psychopath for sure. That was the most interesting client that we had, but for the most part, it's not sometimes they can be funny. There's a lot of funny moments day to day, but in general, it's just you're really just helping out like miserable people that they have really sad lives. But I did some good there, and I think I helped some people there, here and there. So it was worth it.
The way you describe the psych ward reminded me very much, almost to the T, of working in a nursing home. The way you're saying like that, it's like, they're pretty much the worst time of their lives, and they're being held by people who are being paid to drug them up. And, there are some amusing moments, but at the same time, it's mostly just sad. And that mirrors my experience of the nursing home almost exactly.
Yeah, of course. I mean, anytime where you have somebody who the parallel there is they both lost like agency in their lives, and somebody's taking it away from them, and they're trying to get it back however they can. But in the end of life, I mean, that's even harder because a lot of them don't have the hope that they're ever going to get it back.
Yeah. There was but there's definitely some like amusing moments still, and almost in a way of like, this is so sad that you kind of have to find something amusing in it, because otherwise you'll succumb to the sadness yourself.
Yeah.
And like,
you always do. Yeah, you always do. And you find, there's lots of joy there too. There's a lot of people overcoming a lot of obstacles that they've had, and finding breakthroughs. And I used to host a lot of on the ward, like you host the group meetings and everything like that. There's a lot of moments where people really realize something about themselves that they had never realized, and that's those are the moments that kind of get you through all the horrible mismanagement of the rest of the day.
Yeah.
Do you think that when you saw these people having those breakthrough moments, did any of those cause any breakthrough moments for you?
Oh, definitely. I mean, my biggest thing that I took out of the whole thing is I'm a lot easier on other people when they're difficult or hard to understand their actions. It's really, it's kind of everybody's crazy or no one's crazy. You know what I mean? Like if certain people keep acting a certain way again and again, it's not necessarily because they're an asshole. It might be because their dad was an asshole, or because they've had a rough life. It's not really. I can't really blame a lot of people for a lot of things. I mean, we each choose to do specific behaviors, but I don't know. A lot of people don't. I'm not really sure what any of us do. To be honest. I've really been convinced. But determinism is a whole different podcast.
So let me ask you about the history of psychiatry, because that's something that when it's not presented very often. And I do feel like the most history that I ever got came from the Scientologists, which I feel like these are Scientologists. I can't trust them because, they're selling something. Like it's very clear that they're selling something. But that's why I wanted to talk to you, because you're not selling anything. And so if you could tell us some of the history that really stuck out to you, some of the stuff that you saw, and kind of, like you said earlier, goes into COVID and how let's be real, they're trying to break people. But if you could go into some of the bigger points of that, I would love to hear what you've learned.
Well, first of all, the Scientology, you can be right about certain things and still everything else.
Absolutely.
Wrong. I don't know if they're wrong. We might. I mean, I don't know. I've never really measured my feet, so I'm not sure. But the
just offhand, I feel like they're wrong.
I'm gonna guess.
So are you?
Thomas Saz, who I really respect, he wrote The Myth of Mental Illness in the early 70s, maybe. But he was the first one who was like, what are we doing with mental illness and the myth of mental illness? And he actually joined up with the Scientologists, and they formed I can't remember. I want to say C4SS, but I know that's Center for a Stateless Society. I can't remember what it is. But it's like a 4-letter acronym, and they formed a thing. And later he kind of backed off because everybody, as soon as he joined up with them, everybody started discrediting him. Yeah, but he was a famous psychiatrist who wrote a bunch of books on. Anybody who's in the liberty movement needs to read Thomas Saz's Law of Liberty and Psychiatry, which is a really important book. as well as Robin Dawes' House of Cards, which I mentioned earlier. But yeah, so I don't know. They can be right about something. There's a lot of people who, I'm sure Jim Jones is probably right about a couple things here and there too. There's a lot of cults that have, a lot of bad ideas, and then like, hey, there's a good idea or somewhere in there. So I like to listen to everybody and see what they have.
I'm sure someone will clip just that
part
of you saying, I'm sure Jim Jones was right about a few things. I mean, wasn't wrong about everything.
But just offhand, I did recently book someone to come on in September to talk about Jim Jones. So I've done a lot of reading on Jim Jones, and he is one of those who really deeply looks into secret societies, cults, stuff like that. And so in September, we're actually going to do a more or less deep dive on Jim Jones, and I'm excited about that because he was like the ultimate SJW, and most people don't see him that way.
Martyr Made had a great podcast series recently. I think it was Martyr Made about Jim Jones, and it was really good. I think you should check that out for sure. But anyway, the history of psychiatry. The first one I can remember, I think it was developed in Russia, but then it spread to UK and America. But around the 1800, 1805, somewhere around there, they had what they called a tranquilizer chair, which was a chair, and they locked you into the chair, and they put a wooden contraption so you couldn't see anything, and they had a hole for you to defecate, urinate in, and then they just left you in the chair. They just left you in the chair. And they said
sounds
it was
very
amazing.
Russian.
They said, yeah, when they get out, like 3 months later, they're super tranquil. And I'm like, yeah. So they did the trials, it worked great. There was another one where they put you in a coffin-sized box with holes drilled in it. Then they submerged that box underwater until the air bubbles stopped coming out. Until the air bubbles stopped coming out, and then they pulled you out and they brought you back to life. You'll notice this is a common theme in these practices, and I'll tie them together with psychedelics later on, actually. But anyways, so they do that. They basically drown you and then pull you out, and then, you're good. And you'll notice a lot, if you go back and you look at a lot of those early writings, not just about those, but about other ones we're going to talk about, you'll see that they were like, yeah, the patient was very compliant after, very compliant. A lot of it's about compliance, especially when you're an inpatient or back then in an asylum, like it's all about compliance. Now, after that, a little while, we had actually some good treatment. The Quakers they saw all the horribleness that was going around the treatment of the mentally ill. And they developed these moral asylums where they were out in the country and they were beautiful. It's like what you would want an asylum to be, basically. Like they didn't have any medical, it wasn't about medicine or anything like that. It was just about these poor people with mental problems. We'll bring them out to the country and we'll engage them in activities, and we'll it was actually pretty decent. And they were having really good outcomes with mentally ill people. And so the medical establishment saw that and they were like, well, I think we can do that too. And then the hell that was the asylum era started. And when the state took over, there was, I think there was only at its peak like 150 in the entire United States, 150 facilities, but they would do all kinds of really bad therapies. So there was I'm trying to think, I'm skipping a couple, I'll probably go back, but insulin coma therapy, which is they injected you with insulin until you went into a coma. And their scientific studies that they did showed 80%, 83. I don't know. It's been 10 years since I read the papers. But they showed like 80% recovery rate with this. Just putting people in comas and bringing them back out. It was on the cover of Time magazine, I think, at one point about how it was a miracle therapy for mental illness. They also injected people with malaria-infected blood to give them fevers. And then the fevers, there was actually a scientific basis to this because at the time there was syphilis was a big problem, and the spirochete, I think it is, that causes syphilis is susceptible to fever. So that might have actually helped some people. But in general, I think one of the studies, they found out he had a really, I don't remember the numbers, but he had really good outcomes. And then later on they went back and they're like, Oh, that's because half of his patients died, and he just used the ones that didn't die. Okay, that makes sense.
Oh no,
that was a big thing. Because you'll see, like all these were backed by great studies. Yeah, great outcomes in all the studies that the doctors that were prescribing them. I don't know, the whole
let me just
thing. Yep.
So let me ask, because it's a point of interest for me. When the state ties itself into these things, it's typically horrible across the board. And the number one kind of the first thing that came to mind when you mentioned that is actually kind of I don't know how I guess I would describe it as the birth industrial complex, where I don't know in Alabama, I lived in Birmingham, and there are several good I'm sure this is in every state, but there are several good hospitals that center on birth. And around the time that these hospitals came into existence and they started centering a lot of what they did on birth and on having babies, suddenly the propaganda against midwives started coming out.
Oh, yeah.
Propaganda against, and of course, for a number of years, they had that twilight sleep that they would put pregnant women in, which essentially just knocked them out. And they found out later, they did studies and found that during the entire, they may not remember it, but the entire time that these women are asleep and not in pain, they're actually fully cognizant of every moment of pain that they're in. And their brain, does, what's the word? Their brain deals with all of it, recognizes it, they freak out. And there was trauma that had come out. I haven't done a lot of studies on this, but there was trauma that came out after these births and psychological issues that they didn't attribute to that because the women were asleep. They don't remember it. So obviously it wasn't an adverse event. So I just wanted to throw that in there. But
yeah, 100%. Well, the establishment will always fight against that. I mean, we've had a moratorium on psychedelic research for 40 years. Who knows how far ahead we'd be just understanding the human brain just based off that. The thing that I was going to circle back to with those are most of if you go back and everything from electroshock to the water treatment to all that, besides brain damage, the thing that they all have in common is like dying and coming back, rebirth, you know what I mean? And that's kind of, I think there might be something in like the human subconscious, like Hegelian, whatever, like that it goes back to that whole shamanical birth and death and rebirth, you know what I mean? I think that might be it. I don't think that psychedelics are the answer to our healthcare thing. I think they'll just lead us there eventually through research, but we're 40 years behind now because of the state.
Well, and that is something that's coming, I would say coming of age, but with the, excuse me, with the legalization of marijuana, the toes are being dipped in psychedelics, especially in Colorado, because didn't they just last year or something? I mean, it was recent. Like completely legalized psychedelics, or at least mushrooms. I think it was just in Denver.
Boulder. I think it was just in Boulder, but the Rick Doblin and other people at MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, have been doing research on MDMA and LSD and psilocybin for years, especially with end-of-life cancer patients and veterans and things like that, PTSD, and they've been having incredible results. But as I said, everybody got incredible results anytime they want to do something. But I mean, if anybody wants to do something to make psychiatry better, donate to MAPS.
Okay. Well, you said something.
I'm sorry, just real quick for my understanding. What is MAPS?
Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. They're actually based in Georgia. They're doing they're the ones doing all this PTSD and depression and end of life cancer therapeutics with psilocybin and MDA and things like that.
Okay.
Amazing things. Like I said, I don't think that they're going to be the final answer, but I think they're going to lead us to where we can figure out the final answer.
Okay. Well, I mean, you mentioned how there's a lot of death and resurrection, at least mythos, with a lot of the methods that they used to use with these different, but one of the things that I can't help but shake anytime I think about psychiatry is the fact that there was a business that was made out of, and even a traveling business of taking a literal ice pick and hammering it into someone's brain and then calling them healed when for all intents and purposes they weren't there.
Yep. 100%. If you want to know about how great scientific consensus is, the consensus was that they should win the Nobel Prize in 1949. I forget his name. He won the Nobel Prize in 1949 for his amazing cure for mental illness, which was an ice pick. Shove it up your nose and wiggle it around a bit, and person's perfect. Look at him. It's great. He does whatever we tell him. It's the perfect thing. It's like giving Ritalin to a school child. It's great.
It's this idea that as long as you're doing what we tell you, that you're somehow perfect. That makes you great. That you're doing what you're told. Like, my goodness.
That's the whole concept of what is mental illness but a deviation from behavioral norms. That's all mental illness is. So really, you're just saying this person does this too much, or they do that too much, or they're not acting like everybody else is. Look at Da Vinci and Poe and like all these people throughout history, like all of our greatest artists and inventors have all been a little mad. And, that's, I think it was like Cervantes said something like, it's maddest of all to be sane and see life not for what it could be, but for what it is. I'm totally mangling the quote, but it's just madness is I don't know if it's a discrete thing. I don't know if it's a bad thing. I think learning how to harness your own madness is really the only real recipe for being a world-changing artist or inventor or anything.
Yeah, there's certainly that connection between artistry, creativity, and madness that most of the people that we admire for the music they've made or the paintings they've done have been what we consider insane people. I mean, shit, look at Jackson Pollock. He's like the worst person ever, but he made amazing paintings.
Literally, you could go through a list of all famous artists in history, and there's a lot of them.
They're terrible people.
I mean, look at the name of this show. This is something that we embrace, the absurdity, the madness of life. I mean, and that's, if you look at the people who shaped the world typically are the ones that people called mad during their lifetime in some way. And so that's, it makes sense to me what you're saying, because I fully recognize that, because us three happen to be within a subculture online and in life that is considered mad by the great majority of America. We are considered mad because we don't pick the red or the blue team. We may not even pick the dumb yellow team. I know I don't. But that's what this show is about, is because innovation and consciousness, I feel like, happens at the fringes of thought. I think that's where truth is found, is because, I mean, even if you go back in time and you're looking at Jesus, or I think that's my best example, but Jesus was called a madman. That was a big thing for him. And then you look at, Picasso was a madman. Van Gogh was a madman. You have all of these different people who we still remember, but we don't typically remember the ones who weren't mad, who weren't doing something so new that it was considered crazy. I mean, Thomas Jefferson, of all, I mean, I think that there was some sinisterness within the founding fathers, but what he was proposing was considered mad at that point. He wrote a letter to a king and said, "Fuck off," essentially. That's madness.
It's kind of mad, yeah.
And if you're not a little mad and you're saying anything that goes against the current established system of thought, then you will be assigned that label. Like Ignaz Semmelweis, he's like, well, I'm an obstetrician, and I noticed that we always like dissect cadavers. What if we washed our hands in between dissecting cadavers and delivering babies? And everybody's like, what the hell are you talking about? And he died in an insane asylum. He got forced out of the industry, died in an insane asylum.
It's like, what if the Earth isn't the center of the universe?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's all. If you're not mad, then you'll be declared mad if you're trying to change the establishment. That's how it is. Yeah. Always.
It seems to me that insane asylums are more or less where they put people that are inconvenient to the rest of us, because you see this going around online all the time about all of the things that could get a woman thrown into an insane asylum in the 1800s. And one of those things was reading too much. If she reads too much, she's insane. Right. It's not right for a woman to read. Right?
I do agree. I do agree with that stuff. But
then she'll want to vote.
But they did hysterectomies, like hysterectomies. It was all the women's craziness was all based in their organs. They there was one account of a woman who was a nymphomaniac, labeled a nymphomaniac, who's probably like the average suburban college girl, whatever now. But and so they gave her a clitoridectomy, and then it got even worse because she couldn't achieve what she was trying to achieve. It got worse. But they did that. Yeah. They did that in America. Like
if you cut up your sex organs, you're not going to come anymore. And this is a valuable lesson for everybody who wants to cut up their sex organs.
Haven't we all learned that lesson?
Not worth it. Well, there's just a trend in our society right now that says, go ahead.
I was just going to say there are a lot of women right now that are very thankful for psychiatry purely for the fact that hysteria, which is based off of hyster, which is woman, which is they invented vibrators because they thought these pervert ass doctors thought, hey, if I give this woman an orgasm, she'll calm the fuck down.
Well,
no, I've never actually.
Where's the lie?
I've read a lot about the hysterectomies and stuff like that, but I don't remember ever reading anything clinical that was advising those. I think those might have just been advertisements, like your 4 to 5 dentists. I think that might have just. I don't know. I could be totally wrong, but I don't know if they ever really used them much in therapy to the extent that they were like putting people in comas and doing all that. But I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe they did. They must have.
Well, okay. So there was you used to be able to go to your general practitioner and get a treatment, which was him, not using him. I don't know exactly how they did it, but basically the doctor would give you an orgasm, and it was wildly popular. Go figure.
I'm sure that gynecology as a profession was probably really on the up and up. I'm sure.
Right. I mean, fellas, just, if your wife is, crazy, just hit it right. She'll be fine.
Like you in med school, you want to be a proctologist or do you want to do this? And they're like, I'm going to go to gynecology, I think.
Quickly, I just wanted to say one comment because Whip asked, have I been saying that dude's name wrong the whole time? Pronunciation like cough.
Van Gogh.
Technically, so I started saying it like that purely because there was a cute girl on our show last week who was English and they say it like that. And my brain just automatically went there. That just happens.
He wanted to impress the death girl.
I say it like Rango. I just say it's Vango. It's Vango. Like Rango.
But wasn't he French? So it was probably more like some soft.
There's what French people.
And that's what I'm saying. Vingle.
So I read a story about him that he had some kind of mental illness, since that's where the topic we're on, that caused him to not only see the color yellow very intensely, but to experience the color yellow very intensely. And that informed a lot of the way that he painted. And he also like cut parts of himself off and mailed them to his girlfriend. But
who hasn't done that?
But we have Starry Night, so thanks.
Well, there's been a lot of studies. There's actually a whole subject of depressive realism where sometimes people who are depressed see colors in a more accurate manner than others do, and especially the color blue and probably the color yellow at the opposite end of the spectrum. There's been a lot of studies that show that people with depression see colors differently than everyone else does.
What would you say to the theory that people with depression actually have a more realistic view of the world, and because their view of the world is much more realistic, it makes them depressed, and they're not able to, like, I don't know, like deal with it in the way that normal brains do? And I put normal in quotations in case anyone's listening to just the audio.
No, it's an interesting question, because with depression, it can be. I do think that, like, Poe was really into that. Like, he said his depression really was what made him understand people better. And I think there is some. I think with depression, you tend to be outside. You tend to be outside, and you're outside looking at society more because you withdraw and all that. But I don't know if there's so many people with so many different kinds of depressive symptoms that it's hard to generalize. But I do think that often mental illness in general, you end up looking at society from the outside, so it's easier for you to analyze and really understand what's going on, when a lot of people who are just, most people are just going along with whatever everybody's doing because they don't have to stop and ruminate for 8 hours a day on like why everything, why everything's miserable. So it happens.
Actually, Horatius, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but Horatius, there is a documentary also called Happy People, which is about people who live in like the Siberian steppes, and they spend their entire lives in eking out survival in these really difficult circumstances. And they're some of the happiest people you'll meet on Earth because they don't have time to be depressed.
Like, exactly. A lot of
it
is just a function of exactly. A lot of it is just a function of our society, and we don't have to experience. You have to let your kids reach obstacles that are too hard for them to overcome and fail and get hurt and do all these things because that's what makes you who you are. It's like that old Alexis Carrel, who actually is kind of one of the villains in the psychiatry thing, but he was a psychiatrist in France, and he said man cannot remake himself without suffering because he is both the marble and the sculptor. And that's the whole thing. To create an identity, that's how we create our identities. That's how we form them, is by overcoming pain and obstacles and doing things we never thought possible and failing a bunch of times and then finally getting it. And I think that's the major problem today with both the whole, like, I think there are people that are transgendered or whatever, but I think a lot of it is just people don't have an identity. They're not allowed to create a discrete identity when they're kids. And so they get they let other people form an identity. So you can become I'm a Democrat now, or I'm a Republican or whatever. Like you have these groups where I'm a furry, you don't have an identity of your own. So you just take an externally manufactured identity and make that who you are.
I couldn't agree with you more. That is something that I've said for a number of years, that especially, my generation and a little bit before, but mostly my generation and after, we have to deal with a profound lack of identity. Like there's this one girl I knew, and I'm not saying that he's not transgender now, but the deal with this one particular person was that she was always going to the next thing when she became less special. So there was a supreme need for validation. There was a need for being different. There was a need for having these things. And so it was, and you can see all of the different steps as this goes up. And that, among a bunch of other things throughout culture, throughout history that I've noticed, is this desire to have identity. And one of the things that I was going to mention without even you mentioning that is something that I'm learning, which is I need to let my children be bored.
Yes.
Because
really important.
Boredom is so important, because I learned how to be funny out of being bored. I learned how to write out of being bored. I never learned how to draw, but on computers, I learned how to design out of being bored. And so there is this very important aspect of life, which is boredom, where we find ourselves, where we find what we're good at, where we start to hone our skills and become something more than just the norm. And so I just wanted to throw that in there. Boredom is good. Let your children be fucking bored. Take away the tablets and stupid video games. I like video games. Take them away. Let them do what they need to do to become who they are, where they're supposed to be.
I think that's why people don't read anymore, because you have something to constantly occupy your mind. You're not going to sit down and read a book. Not when you've got, you know, a million games to play and things to watch and whatever. And, you know, yeah, I get that you can, you know, obtain knowledge through other means, but there's just nothing quite like reading that, you know, it's kind of unfortunate, I think, that we're losing the written word as a result of that.
Well, and I don't think that it's an accident that I've noticed that in millennials and beyond, because millennials, like people, all of a sudden people are trying to say that Gen X is, oh, we had one foot in analog, we had 1 foot in digital, sort of, but millennials were really the people who had the normal childhood, and within that same childhood had the digital world thrust upon them. And so, I mean, that is what defines a millennial. And Gen Z has never had that. Gen Alpha, the kids that I'm raising, are never going to live without these silly things, the bread and the circus. They're not going to live without the
constant stimulation.
What's the name of the stuff in Brave New World? The drug that they give people.
Soma.
They're never going to live without Soma. No. And
well, another thing with that, with the growing up in that thing, and it ties into the identity thing, is, you know, we used to have, like, our grandparents' generation, like there was like 2 radio stations, and they listened to Little Orphan Annie or whatever. They listened to the Beatles, whatever, right? And then a bat just flew in front of my. Okay. And then they had, you know, and then there was the 5 channels that we all had growing up or whatever. And then we had cable TV. And now we have the internet. And, like, each thing, like when we were kids, like, oh, those are pop kids, and those are hip hop kids, and those are punk kids. And now they're like, that's post pop, electro, funk kids. And that's, you know what I mean? There's like a million different things. We just started out with these cultural groups. Now we have no culture because there's a million different cultures, you know, which is okay. I think that we got to get there, but we're in a transitionary period, and it's like, it's maddening for everyone to wrap their heads around.
TV used to turn off at a certain hour. I don't know what it was, midnight. Let's just call it midnight. It turned off, you know, and our sleep cycles are so messed up now because we are constantly bombarded by screens, by blue light. There's electric light, so light's always on around us, and we never have that, like, darkness to light cycle again. And I think that it's really screwing up not only our health, but like our mental aspects, because we don't have night anymore.
Not really. Mention that when TV was episodic and weekly, and you had to either watch it or miss it, and then eventually VCR record it, watch it later, and then talk to your friends. I can't tell you how many times.
Or you all meet together every week and do it, so it's a communal thing. So there's like a social aspect to it. You're not just sitting alone binging reality TV on Netflix and you're until 4 a.m. You know?
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like, I remember I loved CSI as a kid, and so I would watch CSI on Thursdays. Friday, I would go in and I would talk to John and Griffin and all of these different guys about CSI. You know, look at the science, which is all bullshit, by the way. Like, all of the things they do on that show is absolute bullshit. But it was a community driving device, which of course at this point we have, but you binge it. So it's like, I know that I can talk to Jessica. Like, if we watch the same show, we could talk about the show, but we've already watched 20 plus hours of it. So it's impossible to get into these deep conversations about these little bitty things every week. It becomes one conversation that's a short conversation where we can't remember everything. And so it's this, I mean, technology is brilliant and I love it, but it's so much harder to build community around something like that.
Yeah. I'm going to get probably burned for saying this, but that's actually kind of what I appreciated about something like The Tiger King. That hit, and everybody watched it, and then we all talked about it at length, and it was kind of this unifying cultural phenomenon like we don't really have anymore, because everybody is specialized into their right. So it's not, those niche little special things. It was something we all experienced and then could all relate to each other. Oh, did you see Tiger King? And I kind of appreciate it. Was like old school in a way.
Yeah. And what was interesting about Tiger King is that, yes, we did all talk about it for about 2 weeks and then it was gone. Mm-hmm. Whereas, in the past, it was 24 weeks of stuff to talk about. It was, once a week we talked about this. And I'm not saying that even those things are perfect. It's like book clubs would be better, but we don't have the mental acuity or the mental patience to sit through and read a book together.
I have tried twice to start a book club and nobody reads the book. Nobody it's even just like read one chapter and then we'll talk about it that week, and people can't even manage a chapter. And these are people who read.
Well, our attention spans have been, obviously just destroyed. Really, the answer to most of this is just like, Twitter or whatever, but, it's fun, so whatever.
Well, and I will say, what was interesting about Tiger King was that it felt like that. And like I said, it was very brief, but it felt like that. But then that was mixed with like the first wave of lockdowns. That was mixed with the first, all of that. And then what was crazy about it was maybe 2 months later, it felt like that had happened 10 years ago.
Yes, completely. I completely relate to that. Yeah.
There was this feeling of how the fuck was that 2 months ago? Because it doesn't feel like it was just that.
And the recent past feels faker. There's like a derealization of the recent past. Like, I don't know if it's like everything feels like it's moving quicker now. And it just feels like 3 months ago, like it didn't really feel real. Anything that happens like as a society online, because that's it's a whole fake thing that we just kind of made somewhere along the line. Well, and now it feels real in the moment, but it's not.
Well, and it's like there are a couple of different ways that we could talk about this. Like, for one, you and I, Chris, are in the best group chat on Twitter together. Like we like there are things that are going on in larger subsects of Twitter that are still going on for some reason, even though we murdered it because it was supposed to be a weekend joke and it's still going on for some reason.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
But
I'm the one that started the chat.
He did. But that's what's interesting about that is Whip actually brought this up the other day. Someone had said, what was this thing? And he said it was probably 6 months ago, but that's 12 years ago in internet time.
It wasn't. It was like 2 months ago, and he thought it was 6. He thought he was being generous saying 6 months, but it was like 2 months.
No.
And that's
how it feels.
And that's what's like, and I want to talk about psychiatry. And you mentioned how coronavirus and all of the situation that we're in sort of now but I want to talk about that. But what I was going to say is there are a lot of people that have been so bored and have had so much time on their hands during this that they have, it's like, we used to download information at a certain rate and it was a manageable rate. But now, because of how bored everyone has been, we've started downloading information at a ridiculous rate where we can't. So they say when you read a book, you retain about 10% of what you read when you've gotten through with the book. But right now, I think that there are so many people that are taking in so much information. I can't imagine that we're retaining more than 2 or 3% of the information as a whole. That what we used to get 10%. Someone tweeted the other day, and this is kind of disconnected, but kind of similar. I think it was Malice, actually. He'd said something about meeting someone who doesn't have strong memories of their childhood and how bizarre and how kind of freaked out that made him. And as I read that and as I thought about it, I started to wonder, is this a millennial thing? because for me personally, there are several high points that I remember, but there's a lot of my childhood that you have to remind me of
to make me remember. Most of mine. I'm Gen X. I don't remember most of mine.
Well, you only have so much RAM in your brain to like retain things, and so if it's not important, you throw it away, right?
Well, RAM would be like short-term memory, but 100%. But
I almost went into
as a tech guy and a neuroscience guy, I gotta say.
Well, actually,
it'd be like a hard drive. Like I only have a 20 gig hard drive.
So let me explain RAM to you real quick. So there's RAM and then there's storage. RAM is if you have a desk, that's how many documents you can keep on your desk and can read at any one time.
I'm not going to file this away as important at all.
Storage are your drawers and anything that you can keep in your filing cabinet. So
that's fascinating. Oh my gosh, I'm learning so much.
I learned that at the Apple Store. You're welcome.
Oh, thank you for just enriching my life, illuminating my little brain. Thank you.
Well, I mean, it's a woman brain, so I
needed a mansplaining.
I know. I mean, I don't know where I'll fit that in between baking banana bread muffins recipes and how to sweep the kitchen. I just don't know where I'll fit that in, but thank you for deigning.
Throw it away. Throw it away with the maintenance manuals for the cars, please. Just forget that exists. But no, I do want to get into the fact that you said earlier that what we've been going through with coronavirus, really the government response to this virus and how that pertains to psychiatry, because one of the things that I saw probably a week or two ago was someone explaining how the way that they finally came to control people and to make them compliant and content within their situation when I think it was Soviet. I can't remember exactly what I was reading because I have the memory of a millennial.
Make a note.
But they were talking about what they did was they took something away and then gave it to them in small bursts, so they could feel the good thing, and then so that made the carrot something that they could dream about while they were getting the stick. And that's one of the things that when I heard some doctor on the news talk about how they can't let people out without masks yet because that takes away the carrot of getting the vaccine, and that they have to use the stick again. And I was watching this and going, this is the most insulting thing that I've ever heard someone say on live TV. Yeah. But that seems to be what they've done. It seems like right now, with the talk of the Delta variant, with the talk of the Lambda variant, with all of these different ideas, that they gave us the summer to remind us of what is good, so that they can take it away again, and it will be more compliant in the future.
Well, I think they know it's a seasonal virus and it's going to get worse in the fall and blah, blah. But yeah, no, there's direct correlation. The main correlation is the argument from, scientific consensus. Like the scientific consensus has been wrong so many times. Like thalidomide, like millions of babies were born with deformed limbs because everybody said it was great, except for this one woman at the FDA. One woman, and she's like, no, this is not right, and blah blah blah, and she fought it. We have the Nobel Prize for Medicine. I believe that putting people in a diabetic coma won a Nobel Prize for medicine for psychiatry. Wow. And I believe that, and it definitely in 1949, the frontal lobotomy won the Nobel Prize. So they were both roundly hailed as miracle cures in psychiatry. Miracle cures, and everybody. And so if you went against it, you'd be like, well, the scientific consensus says we should stick something up your nose and rearrange your brains, your frontal lobe, you cannot argue from that. And the other thing is that science isn't just broken now, it's been broken for a very long time, especially in psychology and psychiatry. I mean, psychology, you don't even know, like, it's depressing as someone who studied psychology, like, You can't even, I mean, even going back to like Milgram experiments, there's problems with everything. So, I mean, we can't rely on science because what we didn't really account for is human interference, whether it's conscious or subconscious. There's always going to be some kind of bias. And right now we're looking at, I mean, with the SSRIs, I mean, we've been dealing with that for 30 years, and there's really not any proof. I could go into a whole diatribe of the SSRIs and the antipsychotics because that's like the paradigm right now in psychiatry, and it doesn't work, and it actually makes things worse. They did a study where the recovery rate for never medicated depressives, they had a depressive episode, and after 1 year, 84%, I believe it was 84%, were in remission, and it was gone. People that are medicated was 3%.
Wow.
You're creating with these SSRIs and SNRs and other things, you're creating a permanent state of depression in someone's brain. And I think that's what my depression comes from. Is when I was a kid, I had a divorce and all that, whatever, like most kids of my age. And I was really depressed all the time and blah, blah. So my parents were working, all that. And it was a lot easier to give a kid drugs than it is to give them the love and attention that they need. And it's nothing wrong with them. They thought that the psychiatrist, I remember the relief when I went in there and I was like, the psychiatrist is like, oh yeah, you have this and this. And I'm like, wait, so I'm not just like a bad person. Like it's not my fault. So it kind of, it's a game we're playing with these psychiatrists, and it removes the personal responsibility for your behavior. And at the same time, they give you this new solution, and the new solution, like I believe that I was on maybe 10 different ones when I was a kid, and I believe that as an adult, all my depression is the direct result of being medicated as a kid. They permanently downregulate your neurotransmitters.
Well, and let me just say, my dad did not believe in ADD or ADHD at all. And there are a lot of people who argued with him, but it was one of those things that always stuck with me as interesting because, for one, boys are different than girls, and boys are heavily diagnosed with these things and heavily sedated on these things. And secondly, the Prussian school system and the schooling that we do is heavily based on how girls work. It's almost specifically designed to go well with girls.
It's an accident, but it is 100% true. I don't think it was on purpose because girls, they didn't really care about girls learning back then. But
right,
so wasn't it based on? Work out that way. Wasn't it based on creating factory workers?
Exactly. Well, it's a factory system. We just discovered mass production, and we're like, hey, why don't we do this with kids too? And it just doesn't work, and it has never worked. And there would be no ADD without public schools. It would not exist.
Well, and that was one of those things within my family is I never went to a public school. I did go to a private school, and then I was homeschooled. But my brother went to public school for maybe a year, I think. And within the year, he was the counselor or whatever at the school said he was ADD and he needed Ritalin. And my mom goes, no, that's my baby. That's how he is. He's a little boy. This will destroy the little part of him that is who he is. And I'm not saying that there aren't people who are adults who take some medication and it gets better for them. I'm no expert in this whatsoever. I'm sure that there are some different medicines or natural substances that might help me focus. But that was my mom's decision, and I think it was first or second grade for him. Maybe it was later, but she pulled him out, and we went to private school because she felt like he would lose, and this kind of ties back to boredom. He would lose his creative streak.
Yeah.
Yep. Always. Yep.
And like that's one of the things is I never claimed to be the funniest person in the world. I can throw a quip. I I can stand up with a lot of good people, but if it weren't for me being bored and going, hey, can I sound like Elvis? I couldn't. I was 7, but these different things.
But that was funny as shit.
I wouldn't have grown the way that I have. Like, I am from Alabama. I may not sound like it, but it's because when I was young, I started trying to change my voice to sound like other people. Mm-hmm. And so I have some pretty strong voice control based purely on my boredom and wanting to make people laugh. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting to me that even though there are times I struggle to get work done or struggle to focus on different tasks, I truly believe if my little brain hadn't been bored, you wouldn't get any of, like, I'm not saying there are millions or thousands or hundreds of people who like what I do, but there's a small amount of people out there who appreciate me, and it's because I was allowed to be bored as a child.
So I'm having this thought about how we deal with people who have depression and people who have ADHD or, problems with attention and stuff like that. And it all comes down to this idea that everything can be cured, that we have the hubris in science to believe that we could cure something because it's a problem. Therefore, if we throw any number of drugs at it, eventually we'll find the one that makes them all better. Well, what if that's not the case? What if depression is something that some people have? And instead of learning to embrace ourselves in depression and handle our depression, we're given this sort of carrot and hope that, okay, it can be cured. And if you just put yourself through the ringer over and over and over again, eventually you'll be normal, instead of learning to deal with yourself as you are. And exactly. I think that's maybe a great crime.
Yeah, no, I think so too. If you look at, there was a bunch of studies that they did where the outcomes for schizophrenics in third world countries where they didn't have access to any of these medications, any talk therapies, nothing, were drastically better than the recovery rates in the United States.
That does not surprise me.
Yeah, and I think the first reason is because, and it's an important thing, we try to simulate it with the state, but it's this communal and familial, like, community, social net, you know what I mean? Social support from everyone around you. And I think that in the third world, you have to have that. If crazy Uncle Tommy is doing crazy things, then the whole family, it's up to them to be like, hey, Tommy, like, whatever, we got to do this. And you got to work, or you got to do this or whatever. You have to, instead of just shipping them off to crazy Uncle Tommy, and at Christmas time in the psych wards, be empty. There'll be nobody there because everybody invites crazy Uncle Tommy back to for Christmas, and they give him a shower and shave and they some gifts or whatever, and they clean him up, and then they get around January, they start getting tired and it comes still back up again. And I think we, instead of taking personal responsibility for not even just our family members, but members of the community that are hurting, instead of doing that, we're just like, I pay my taxes, somebody will take care of it. You know?
And also, like, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Kim, but I grew up poor, and so I didn't have access to doctors. And I have depression, and I've had to learn to live with my depression rather than having, millions of different types of neurotransmitters thrown at me. And so now as an adult, when my depression comes on, I kind of look at it like a storm. And I say, okay, it's going to rain for a while, but I know that eventually it will clear up, and then I will see the sun again and it will be fine. And so I have like a little kit that when I get depressed, I know, okay, make sure you drink water, make sure you take a shower. It's just, I don't know that I would have developed those skills if instead of going, this is part of my life, they had told me, no, there's a cure. So I haven't been looking for a cure. I've just sort of accepted this as part of the whole Jessica tapestry. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, you don't have to change anything. We'll just give you this pill. But if there's a lot of people living
affluence
in
is
a
the
life
enemy
that
in this case.
is not exactly. A lot of people are living in a life that if you took a non-depressed person and inserted them into that life, then that person would become depressed. And there's no incentive for them to make anything better if you just just take the pill. If the pill doesn't work, we'll just give you another pill and then another pill and then another pill. You know? And none of them are. I haven't
had a lot of reasons to be thankful for growing up poor, but I think I just really landed on a big one. Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
And Horatius brought this up, and this is something that I've been thinking about. I don't know if I've said it, Jessica. You'll have to tell me if I have. But acceptance of what you cannot change is very important. In my opinion.
It is. If I had to recommend one book to read, it's a big book, but read The Liberated Mind by Stephen Hayes. He's the inventor of acceptance and commitment therapy, and that's a big part of that. It's a mindfulness mixed with acceptance. It's really good. The whole book is really worth it, so I would recommend that if I had to recommend anything to improve anybody's mental health.
And one thing on that point of acceptance, what you cannot change, is important, that I want to mention is the fact, I don't know how it was for Gen X. I don't know how it was for boomers. But millennials, I can tell you from firsthand experience, we're told that we can change the world. We were told that we're here to make massive change on a global scale. And I think that one of the things that I realized, especially within the last few months, definitely over the last decade, but especially over the last few months, is I am not meant to change the world. That is not within my purview. That is not something that I should strive for. Because, and that people would say that's a black-pilled position. You can say that all you want. But if I can't tend my own garden, there's no reason why I should be trying to tend the world's.
Well, and you do change the world by tending your own garden.
Exactly.
And that's my whole thing. Like I was thinking to myself earlier, like after I tell them about psychiatry, and then they're like, well, what's the answer? And then I'm like, well, first of all, I'm not one of those people that feels the need to have an answer or whatever. But you can change the world by each one of us, like doing things to make your life better and the lives of your kids, like homeschool and you know what I mean? There's a million different things that you can do, but it doesn't mean you have to affect everybody else. It means you change you, and then your neighbor's changing them, and then everybody's changing themselves. Let's see. The only answer is everybody to start making the right choices when it comes to how to live. Basically.
Well, and I think that when you start changing yourself and you start having these moments of clarity, these moments of being able to actually change something in your life, you become a spotlight to a better life. And I think that is the most important thing that we can do, is to live a good life and set that as an example. And so
on that theme, go ahead.
I was just going to say on what Jessica said before, is it's not our place. And that's something, what was it? Jeremy Kaufman from Odyssey tweeted, I think it was yesterday, that Ron Paul failed, that Rothbard failed, that Mises failed. We don't have a libertarian society. What are you going to do differently? And my response was, I think that the realization that it's neither my job nor necessarily desirable to try to affect liberty or freedom on a global scale, especially one that's state-centered, because that's what all of these people were talking about. They centered the state, and then you have to do this, that, or the other in order to fix everyone. And I don't like. I think that all dictators should be strung up. I think they should be boiled. But at the same time, it's not my job to impose freedom and my mindset and my philosophy on the world. That's not fair. That's not what everyone wants.
I think the number one thing that anybody in the liberty movement can do to promote liberty is take it upon yourself to go find people that are in trouble, that are less fortunate than you. And if you don't have the money to donate, then go yourself and volunteer and do these things. Because all we hear again and again is we need the state to help poor people. We need the state to help the less fortunate. No, we don't.
You have to help the less fortunate.
Exactly, because they don't want to do it themselves. They want other people. Asheville is filled with all these rich white women, and they all are like, oh, we need to help the poor by voting this, voting that. And then every time, my wife works for a homeless shelter, every time she has something and she needs help with something, none of them are anywhere to be found. But they're like, I voted for Joe Biden, so everything's solved now.
Right. So I used to be a leftist SJW, the exact kind of woman that you're talking about, that would have voted for Joe Biden and thought, well, I did my part. And one of the people who is responsible for breaking me from that ideology is Jordan Peterson, which is why I'm actually like really grateful to him. I know not everybody is, people have problems with him that are valid, and I don't disagree with those things. But one of the things he said that really affected me out of that mentality was that in clinical psychology, you learn that the chances that the intervention that you have chosen for your patient having the positive effect that you desire it to have is almost zero. So know before you start poking around in someone's life that the chances that you will do more damage than you will fix them is much, much greater than the chances that you will fix them. So he kind of translated that up to the people who want to like save the world. Like, you know, the chances that your intervention for saving the world will have the positive effect that you want it to have is almost nothing. So, you know, you need to, you know, the phrase, make your own bed, tend your own garden. If your house is a mess and you go out there and start tapping the world, the idea that you're going to somehow fix it is, you know, you're likely to do more damage because you can't even vacuum your own rug. You know,
almost always the urgent need to do something is almost always worse. I said on my old account that got Twitter deleted, I used to always say, if you stood and you looked back at the path of history, you would see enormous piles of corpses that are only there because one person thought they knew what was best for everyone else. And that's all it is. All of history, every bad thing in history is all because Hitler thought he was going to create this new race and save his country, and like Stalin and like Mao,
the Soviets knew man.
And the entire history of mankind, back down to recorded history, is always whenever someone thinks that they know what's best for everyone else, it never ends well, ever.
And there's a perfect C.S. Lewis quote for this that I happened to share from when I shared it the first time a decade ago on Facebook, which is, of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep. His cupidity may at some point be satiated. But those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's COVID people right there. That's right there. Yep. They know it's
and it's so apt. And I want to say, one thing I want to say is, a lot of times when you hear someone on a podcast or in some form of where they're broadcasting their voice or their thoughts in whatever medium, is there's this assumption that this person who's telling you, like me, to tend your own garden, that he is doing well, that he is tending his own garden, that I'm not.
My garden's a mess. Don't listen to me.
My garden's a mess.
My wife watches the corner.
I'm
actually, my garden's great. Just my metaphorical garden.
Yeah, my metaphorical garden is a mess.
He projected that one.
No, I have my real garden's great. It's just my metaphorical garden.
Yeah, this you would like Chris for multiple reasons, Jessica. This is just one of them. But my metaphorical garden is in shambles right now, and I'm struggling to get it back. And so when I say to tend your own garden, when I have said multiple things on Twitter, when I'm making these things, these stances or these takes that sound good, it's because I'm directly preaching to myself. The intro, when I talked about my broken glasses, is no joke. Like, look at this. Look at this garbage. It's destroyed.
I've had so many pairs like that. Oh, trust me, I know.
But I want to say thank you to Chris, because yesterday I was in the group chat and I was like so mad about it. And that dude sent me the money to get a new pair that will arrive tomorrow.
Hey.
When my wife and I were struggling, I had those glasses and they were broken in 50. But I had a friend who used to once in a while just, and we were so grateful. So I'm just passing it on. It's not really.
That's a mensch move right there, sir. You're a true blue mensch.
And so when I say this, I am trying to tend my own garden. And Chris is right.
Well, instead of tending your garden, just demand that other people tend it for you. That's how it works now. Just be like, somebody needs to fix my garden, or else.
Well,
I'm gonna try that tomorrow. Funny. I'm gonna walk out there and yell until someone comes and weeds for me.
and that's what's so funny is like a lot of times I don't ask for help because I'm so hellbound and determined to get this figured out. And so I always appreciate the fact that there are people who see the need, and I think and meet it. And so I think that that's what's the important lesson is. Well, what I'm saying is my job is to tend to me, tend to my family, and to tend to my neighbors. And that's where I cut the line at this point. And so I may cut it before the neighbors. But I just want to say, with Chris saying that earlier, you proved it yesterday. And I couldn't appreciate that more.
We constantly extol the virtues of self-reliance to the point where we won't ask for help when we need it sometimes. And I think this maybe, and I don't want to speak for men because I'm not a men's, but I think for men, it can be especially hard to ask for help because they have that stigma more than women do, that they're supposed to be completely self-reliant. And so you're not even allowed to have emotions. And so God forbid you're actually sad. God forbid you actually need a hug.
Oh, yeah. I have a feeling
all I'm saying is that yesterday when I was sharing with Jessica where my mindset was, and when I told the boys where I was, it was painful for me because I don't like to because I know that in both of these situations, I don't have to worry about showing my belly and it being stabbed. Like I don't have to worry about that, but there's still that. I don't know if it's because of how men are raised or whatever it is, but I do not like
I think
that.
we don't want to show weakness. I mean, vulnerability and weakness, like up until a few years ago, that was something that was really difficult. Now it's social currency. So
now and Chuck Schumer's crying on TV.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah. Well, we need more
lizards don't have tear ducts. Come on. Sorry.
Well, they have simulators.
I gotta make a lizard joke if you bring up Chuck Schumer. Come on,
one of the things that I wanted to mention is one, I'm on TikTok because I'm hip, and so I've seen 2 videos.
You break your hip
recently. One of which was a guy talking. I think it may have been a TED Talk. I'm not sure what the context was, but he was talking about SSRIs. And he was talking about the specific, I can't remember the name of the drug, but he was talking about the specific drug that was studied, and it was found to be just as good, if not better, than other drugs, and that it was good for anyone who was depressed. And what he found when he looked into the studies is that there were, like in one of the instances, that it was good for people who were depressed. There was one study that said that, and 4 that were not published and thrown away that said the opposite. And then when it was the same thing was true for it being played against other SSRIs, and it showed that it wasn't better, but there were 2 studies that said it was, and 6 were thrown away, something along those lines.
Oh, no, it's a constant
consensus.
Yep.
Right.
Consensus. Exactly. It's created. Consensus is created via political means, not via scientific means.
Yeah, via political means.
There's no such thing as scientific consensus.
Right.
That's not a thing. Yeah.
Not if you're a real scientist. There's right.
But, SSRIs in general, like they're mostly shown to be around the same as a placebo. But there was first of all, the entire myth that depression is caused by an imbalance of neurotransmitters. There's no evidence ever to support that, and a lot of evidence that counters it. They did a study where they measured the 5-HIAA, which is a serotonin metabolite. It's like a byproduct of serotonin in the brain, so we can kind of measure like the amount of serotonin, whatever. And they took it. You can only take it from the cerebrospinal fluid, so they did that, and they measured it, and there was no difference between depressed people and non-depressed people, but people that were previously treated with an antidepressant, there was a difference between depressed that had been. Oh my God, there's like bats everywhere tonight. What the hell? Oh, there's a space mouse. Anyways, Yeah, there was, but in people that had been previously treated with antidepressants, there was a difference. So it's showing that there's a depression that's a natural or maybe unnatural, but it's a process that you go through. But once you have taken an antidepressant, then you may have lifelong antidepressant caused iatrogenic depression. You know what I mean? And that's the big thing with me is it may permanently alter your brain structure so you have depression for the rest of your life. So you have to take these pharmaceuticals and make more money. And this one doesn't work anymore. We got this new one it's coming off patent anyway. We got a new one on patent, and you can take this one. You know, it's just a constant.
Yeah.
It's just incentive. It's perverse incentives everywhere. That's a whole other podcast. I could do a whole podcast on just perverse incentives in society because that's really the root of all evil. It's awful.
Well, and
that sucks because that sucks because they're playing God too, and you permanently messing up somebody's brain, saying, okay, this medication doesn't work for me, try another, and it's never, the answer is always some other medication instead. Just go until you find one that'll work. Yeah,
exactly. And they try to keep down like I used to when I worked on the unit. We used to always have like pens and clipboards and everything with all the names of them, and I would never use any of those to show any of them to the patients. Everybody else would, whatever. And they try to make it like it's an evil thing with the psychiatrist, but honestly, the psychiatrists, they aren't taught any kind of therapy. Most psychiatrists that I know, I would debate a psychiatrist all day long. I'm not worried about that. But not on like medication dosages, but on general theory. But the main thing, just lost it. So psychiatrists,
like doctors
they need
not
well,
doing
but
anything
when you
about
have a hammer,
nutrition.
everything looks. It's the whole. If you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's what they have. Those are the tools that we have. Like he can't just be like, yeah, go do ayahuasca or something. He's got to use the tools that he has, and he has to diagnose you. You cannot go in there without a diagnosis. He has to diagnose you, or you don't get your insurance will pay. So you have
definitely
to get a diagnosis. If you're not crazy, you're going to get a diagnosis, or your insurance isn't going to pay.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's the other thing is the way that the insurance system has altered medical treatment in that the doctors are looking at how they will get paid as opposed to what is best for their patients. And, I experienced that with my doctors to the point where I don't seek out their help anymore because I'm like, no, you're trying to use me as a method of billing and not at all concerned with my health care. So I pretty much have to be on my deathbed for me to go see a doctor at this point.
Me too. I trust me. I go to the VA, so it takes a lot. Yeah. They left me there for 6 hours on the emergency room floor, saying that I was faking it to get drugs, and my wife dragged me to another hospital where I started to go psychotic, and it turned out I had meningitis. And they never took my temperature, 106-degree temperature. They never even took my temperature. They just left me there. They're like, yeah, he's drug seeking. Because I had been in there for headaches for like weeks at a time. And then I went in there and they're like, no, he's just looking for pain meds or something. So she dragged me to a real hospital and I got better. So I don't have a lot of love for
I have chronic back pain. And I don't go talk to doctors about it because back pain is the number one thing that drug seekers will go to the doctor complaining of so that they can get drugs. I'm afraid to talk to my doctor about my back pain because I don't want them to write drug seeker in my chart. And then the one time I did go, they gave me a bottle with 90 tramadol in it when all I wanted them to do was give me a referral to get an MRI. I wanted them to look at my back and see what was wrong with it. And they're like, no, here, have pills. Like, I don't want
tramadol
these.
Is disgusting. I would rather have morphine than tramadol. It's awful. Ugh.
And to be honest, that was one of the moments that kind of disillusioned me from medical care. That I was like, I can't believe you just handed me 90 tramadol, which is, I don't know a lot about pharmaceuticals, but that's the drug that everybody gets addicted to. And I'm like, are you effing kidding me? And they didn't give me the MRI referral. I still have not had an MRI on my back.
Well, it costs less to get drugs than to give you those. And they get incentives, I'm sure. I get a lot of
and then
incentives.
every time I go to a new doctor, like I went to an endocrinologist because I had a hormone imbalance, and they say, so you're taking tramadol? And I'm like, that was 5 years ago. They gave me one prescription 5 years ago. I didn't even take them. And every doctor goes, so you're on tramadol? No.
No.
Like y'all don't even know what you're talking about.
Yep.
So,
no, they never do. No, and
Yeah.
that's a big thing. You brought up an endocrinologist. I wanted to say that too. When I was working in inpatient psych, me and one of the nurses that I worked with, one of the few good psych nurses that I've ever met, this guy Jerry, he was great. But we really tried to push to test especially every female that comes in with depressive symptoms for thyroid dysfunction and hormone panels, and they refused because of the money. And then we were doing them anyway. Like he's like, oh, do you feel like blah blah blah, like something that would, cause them to have a thyroid panel, right? And all these women with depressive symptoms, when we got them to test, like half the time it was thyroid problems, and they would have been on SSRI, which would have not helped them, and would have permanently put them in a state of depression when all they needed was to have the thyroid evaluated. And I think hormone panels and testosterone and thyroid, and a lot of that is really a lot of the depression that we're seeing. And nobody's really testing for it. It's really cheap to give a bunch of Synthroid, which is off label. It's like off patent. So, it's not a big money maker.
I ended up taking
ivermectin.
And I don't know that I recommend this. This is not medical advice to anybody, but because I wasn't finding help with my actual doctors, I went online and started looking at homeopathic medicine. And one of the things that was suggested for hormone imbalance was an herb called ashwagandha. And when I started taking the ashwagandha, it not only brought my hormone levels back to normal, and they were off the charts. And they brought my hormone levels back normal, but they decreased my depression. And so I don't know if I try not to use it too much because I don't want the effect to wear off. But it's just amazing to me that a root, which is something you can buy over the counter, had more effect on me than months worth of different medications and different therapies. And I asked my endocrinologist, is it okay if I try this? He said, no, it's not FDA approved, and I don't listen to authority. So I did it anyway, and it ended up being what helped. So,
I did the same thing with cocaine, and my doctor's like, no, don't take it. I'm like, I think it'll help my depression. It works out great. I smoke crack every day. It's not even addictive. It's great.
Have you ever smoked Parmesan?
Not yet, but I've been sending messages to Hunter for a while now to try to set up something.
One thing
I would totally hang with Hunter Biden like anytime.
I think most of the people in that group chat would.
I know he's a viewer, so if he's out there,
Okay, so he seems based. In reality, he is not. I just want to clarify my statement there. Sure. Yeah, he seems based on the outside. He is not in reality. Also, he is a front for his father's bribes, and he's using art to do it, and that really pisses me off. So.
Yeah. No.
Can I just say, there was one good thing that I saw recently out of TikTok, and that was I saw a TikTok of a guy who was talking about. He said, I've always had a hard time finding a job that suited my needs, and the long and the short of it, he was talking about how he was ADHD, and so he had this video, and he said, if you are what I'm going to call a wild card and have these ADHD symptoms, then I would like you to go on this website. I think he used SurveyMonkey or something, and give me your information. And I'm going to talk to different companies who need what you provide. And I'm going to help you set up interviews so that you can provide work and labor to someone who needs that exact type of thing. And he thought that maybe it would get 40 views and he might get, this maybe up to 100 people. And it was thousands of people who had been diagnosed ADHD or who had been told that they're screwed up or had been told that they can't work in this type of position. And there were, I think after the first day, there were 50 companies that contacted him through TikTok to say that we need this type of person for this type of job. And thousands of people signed up through his SurveyMonkey. And so I think that not to sound like you're hippy dippy libertarian person, but the free market, there was this guy who had an idea, and there were companies that were like, no, we need that kind of creativity, we need that kind of independence, we need that kind of thing. And they used a quote unquote mental illness as a means to help people find jobs. And that's great.
No, it's great. I've had a theory a long time. I've never actually talked about it with anyone, but I had a theory a long time that ADHD, as we see it today, is actually an adaptive response to technology, and that where our brains are shifting in response. We're in a transitional period, so it's hard to see while we're in it. But I think afterwards we're going to look and we're going to see that ADD is our brains adapting to this new way of information absorption, where it's parallel processing as opposed to serial processing. If you know about like computers and things like that, like I think you can take a lot of different things at once as opposed to focusing on one thing. Like in the old days, like almost nobody that grew up today could go back and go to Oxford in 1902. You're going to have to read like these long, dense books and like Latin. You're never going to be able to do that because our brains they don't work that way anymore. They've adapted. And I think that ADHD is our brains kind of, our brains are very plastic. They're very malleable and they change. And that's how psychedelics work to help things, is they kind of, they let your brain, they get rid of all the old connections and let you make new connections, And it's just like the death and rebirth thing, neurologically as well as spiritually as well as psychologically. But with ADHD, I really think that it's our brains adapting, and it's not going to be maladaptive. It's maladaptive to the old ways, but it's adaptive to the new ways. And the old ways is public schooling and schooling in the classroom and desk. And it's maladaptive for that, but it's not going to be maladaptive for the next thing. So I think we should be designing education around ADD as opposed to trying to drug it out of existence.
So if I can break in just 1 second, a lot of people in the chat are asking where to get ashwagandha, and I did put a tiny URL. I just learned how to do that, by the way. But I want to make a note about buying ashwagandha, which is that the source where it's grown really matters. If you buy ashwagandha that's grown in China or India, it can have a lot of heavy metal pollutants in it, which are, not good. I found when I take ashwagandha that's grown in China, I get headaches from it. So I put that URL in there. It's organic ashwagandha that's grown in Canada, and it doesn't give me a headache. So if you're
My
sensitive
wife had that
to
same problem. Yep.
Right. Okay. So it really does matter. It affects the quality a lot. Yeah. So use the link and the brand that I sent. It's from Bear Organics. And I'm sorry to interrupt.
But no, you're good. I think, though, that you make a good point about how times have changed and how the functions of the human brain have changed, and we need to adapt. Because, I mean, you're talking about Oxford, but look at, 100 years ago, people were working on factory lines, and they did the same exact task over and over and over again. And most people cannot do that anymore. In fact, it's been automated to the point that people don't need to do that. So that's good, I would say. But it's good that there are these little aspects, like I said in this TikTok video, that there are people who are saying, I don't work this way, but I can work and I can do multiple things. So it's I have been trying to get this job recently, and I won't say with who or what it is exactly, but even though the pay is less than what I'm making right now, or what I have been making rather, because I'm kind of out of work at the moment, I would be able to put on several different hats. And so I would be able to do one thing that faces people and talks to people, which is something I'm good at and I enjoy. And also I would be able to do some design and some creative work, which I need to have any sort of happiness. I like to create something, which is why I put so much time into this show and making video stuff, is because I have to create something. But I think it's really good to see not just that people are noticing it, but that the people who are trying to make the changes are the people who are affected by it. Because I think a lot of times when it's led from the outside, it's far more deleterious to the human race as a whole than when it's someone who's felt it, who knows what it's like and knows what they need, if that makes any sense. So I like seeing someone who's felt the effects and who's experienced these things leading the charge and making changes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. Well, it's always, I don't know. I agree 100%. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. What was I was gonna say, okay, so I feel like we kind of talked about coronavirus and how things are and how psychiatry, I feel like we've gone in a lot of different directions because that's how this show goes. There's never a point A to point B to point C, etc. But when it comes to psychiatry, it does seem like there's been a lot of torture of people in the past to try to quote unquote better them. But what do you think? Do you think the thing that makes it as so mental health or mental illness as a myth? Do you think that it's the ties to the state and the ties to compliance, or do you think it's more than that?
Uses it. I don't think there's a nefarious thing. I think that everybody understands that there's people that have mental problems, and they always have. And back 2,000-3,000 years ago, maybe there would have been shamans or something else, or there were artists. 1,000 years ago, there were artists or whatever, or the town drunk or whatever. But I think that a lot of our mentally ill are ending up in prisons and psychiatric facilities and being drugged, where they lose all sense of self and everything that's. Most of the drugs that we have now, basically, they sedate you and make you more compliant, and they take away all of the bits of you that make you who you are. And I think that there's not really a nefarious purpose. There's with the pharmaceutical companies, obviously, just keep selling the same drug over and over again, basically. But I really think that most psychiatrists and therapists really want to help people. But I think that the things that you can do to help yourself are basically free, and nobody can really profit from them. And I think that people don't want to hear, you got to take personal responsibility for yourself. People want to hear, here's a magic pill and it's going to solve all your problems. And that's really
I noticed
where it comes from. It's both of us. It's not just the psychiatrist; it's the patients too.
You had said earlier. You said earlier about contentedness, and I actually wrote it down because I wanted to bring it back up. And you had mentioned about like the way that as long as you're not causing a problem, we've kind of conflated that with mental wellness. And but it's also on the end of, like you said, with the patient, that we have determined that we must be content all the time. And we're completely unwilling to live with any kind of discomfort, by like even the slightest discomfort. I've had a headache all day. I posted about the air quality not being so good across the mainland US right now. And that might be the cause of my headache. But the point was, when my husband came home, he said, "How are you doing?" I said, "I kind of have a headache." He says, "Did you take something for it?" I thought, gee, it's not debilitating. I'm a little uncomfortable, but I'm not debilitated. And it's just automatic that, well, if you're uncomfortable, take something. Well, what's so wrong with being just a little bit uncomfortable? It's not hurting me in any way. Not really. If I weren't able to function, I would take aspirin, but that's not why. It's okay for me to be uncomfortable. Yeah.
No, I agree completely. Well, think about all like the monks and people that achieve enlightenment. They don't do it by like, I played Nintendo 64 for like 48 hours and I achieved enlightenment. No, they like sit on a roof,
asceticism,
mountaintop, and it's freezing and whatever. That's a lot of like Rogan talks about, like freezing himself or whatever, and it's a lot of the. You have to, if there's no adversity in modern life, then you have to create it. I think that's why people love camping and things like that, even though obviously even camping now at a campground or whatever, it's not really roughing it. But
whenever I'm hiking, go ahead. Sorry.
No. Whenever you're hiking.
Well, I was saying, whenever I'm hiking, I always get this sense of, back in the old days, this is how people would travel. And they would go from one place to another. And sometimes it would take them a couple of days. And when I'm in the middle of my hike, I always get this sense of, man, I wish we were going somewhere. Like, I wish there was like a point to this journey instead of I'm going in a circle and coming back around to the parking lot eventually. And yes, I'm getting exercise. I'm getting outside. There is a point to the journey, like in the real sense. But like at the same time, you know, you used to, this is how you would travel. And there's something very natural about walking to your destination. We don't do that anymore because we drive everywhere. And believe me, I love being in an air conditioned car. Don't get me wrong.
No,
but,
totally. We're trying to, my wife and I are legitimately trying to create hardship and things like that. Like, I think with my 13-year-old, maybe in the fall, we're going to try to just do the Adirondack Trail just through North Carolina, like just that section.
Cool. You know what I mean? Yes.
With very little stuff. Like, I want him to be a little hungry. I want him to be a little I want him to be really tired, you know?
Because when you get to the end,
you never know who you are until you push yourself further than what you think you can do, you know?
Like how good food tastes after you've been fasting for a while. Food never tastes so good as after you've been fasting. Yeah.
There's no better seasoning than hunger. But that's interesting to me because it makes me think about back in the day when I wanted to hike to Machu Picchu, when I wanted to do the hard hike up to the beautiful place. And one conversation that we're going to have in the future is with my friend Kim, who's really dived into the philosophy of Stoicism. And one of the things that I came across recently was the concept of enough and having enough. Because contentedness is one thing, but being able to feel that you have enough, that you're subsisting, that you're able to function, that you're able to live and even find joy within enough rather than excess is such an important thing. And I didn't know it was important until I came across someone talking about it.
And gratitude ties into that so much because people have no gratitude anymore. Like they don't understand. Like you were just saying, like you're walking and like people used to have to walk like 50 miles to go do something, whatever. And you got the air conditioned car now. People are not grateful. They're like, I have an air conditioned car, but it's only a Subaru, and I want to.
But it's a Tempo, right.
Yeah.
I will say, I think when you were talking about that, one of the things that I thought about is the false adversity of politics, because this is something that I am learning my way through, and we know we've talked about different aspects of that learning in this episode, but people think that tribalism is the problem, when I think that the problem with tribalism is if your tribe is too big. Because if you haven't met with and the person who is the chief of your tribe doesn't know your name, your tribe's too big.
Yeah.
Period. But I think that the problem is that we are affluent in a lot of ways. Right now, I don't feel very affluent, but we are affluent. We have very little adversity. And so there are tons of people who are so starved for the fight, who are so starved.
Oh, they want to be those hippies from the 60s so bad.
Yeah, there's so
nowhere. My wife is Cuban, and there's nowhere that more exemplifies that than the suburbanite white girl who just learned about communism in her freshman year of college, and she's telling my wife, whose mom and dad fled Cuba, where half their family were murdered, and they're like, "Oh, Cuba's pretty great, actually. Have you heard about their healthcare? They got a big literacy rate. Like, there's nothing worse than these Americans who think that they're victims, and they're not. They're living in the most affluent place in the affluent time in the world.
Kings did not have the luxury that I have.
Yeah, people are looking for adversity, and they have found it in politics. And it's become so insular. It's become so niche. It's become so individual that there are these little gangs of people who want to be even different and have more adversity than others. So they join these other smaller groups. There's all of this going on.
Victimhood is social capital.
It is, and it's bizarre to me because believe it or not, I was raised as a man, you know, and so
what happened?
I grew my hair out and lost my testicles, but no, but I was raised.
They're under your beard.
Okay, so the best alien in Men in Black, the Men in Black series, was the Balchinian. I don't know if you remember this, but I think it was Men in Black 2.
Filed that away somewhere.
K and J go into, I forget what the situation was, but there's a alien called a Balchinian, and they pull down his hood or whatever it is, and there's a set of testicles hanging from his chin, and the guy, and he jumps up and he kicks him, and I will never not derive joy from that stupid joke. I will never not think that's funny, and it's so stupid, and I know it. But people desire adversity, and they think that there's a relative that I have who will not, and I used to be this guy, so I don't fault him because it's hard to get past this point when you're in this paradigm. But I have a relative who will not admit that Donald Trump was funny or said anything funny. And it's objectively bullshit to not think that. It's
even if you hate him, he's funny. You can think somebody is funny that you hate. Like, it's not that difficult. There's a lot of people. Like AOC is hilarious.
People want this adversity, and so they're willing to forego pleasure or laughs or whatever to have this false adversity. And I hate to break it to anyone who listens to this show, but when you're partaking in politics in any form, you are partaking, especially in America. Like I don't think that America is great for human thriving. I don't think that we're as free as we could be. I don't think that we're living. I don't think this is the best it could be.
The best life.
But I do think that right now we're living in the zenith of human flourishing. I think that technology, the way we live, the freedoms that we have is amazing.
Give it a couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, things are going to get worse before they get better.
Oh, wait.
But
be careful what you ask for, I guess.
But when you are finding this adversity, when you're on Twitter talking about how you're oppressed in America, where you can't take a joke about every country but America being a shithole without, you can't take that joke and laugh at it.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's ridiculous to me.
Yeah.
But you're looking for something to fight, and I don't fault you for wanting to fight something, because the fight is a very human and, in a sense, very animal thing to desire. So if you are in the political fight, I don't fault you for that, but I will tell you what you're doing is you're superseding the important. You're superseding your own life. You're superseding what you could be doing to make your life better. And instead you're dealing with the global, you're dealing with the national, you're dealing with the state. That's sad to me.
They're taking that desire that you have to fight something, and then you're being manipulated into fighting for what the people that are oppressing everyone want. So most of the people, they're like, everybody's oppressed, we should do exactly what the corporations and the politicians want. That doesn't seem right. I don't know. Aren't they the ones oppressing people?
Right. Well, and also, I'm not saying there isn't any oppression at all. But what I'm saying is that when you are claiming that what Biden or what Trump did is oppression, you're missing the mark. because the last 4 years, the last 5 years haven't, I mean, well, okay, minus 2020. That's a fucked up situation. But outside of, because most people aren't even fighting lockdowns, they're not even fighting masks, they're not fighting vaccines, they're not fighting these things that I would say, yes, this is legitimate oppression. They're fighting like some trumped up version of the culture war. Mm-hmm. And you take, I mean, this is to me, and this is something I'm learning, and this is something that I'm growing in, is I need to deal with me. I need to deal with my family. I need to deal with my own prosperity. I need to deal with my own ability to circumvent, to subvert the oppressors. Anything beyond that at this point in time is vanity. I mean, is there a disagreement there? Because I feel like so much of it's vanity.
No, it is.
What's that hubris again that says we can cure everything?
To me, it's gullibility. Gullibility is the driving. Like, are you seriously telling me that Nancy Pelosi is the one that's going to lead people out of oppression, or Joe Biden, or Donald Trump, or any of these people? Like, none of these people have any interest in bringing anybody out of oppression. Like, I don't know how you could possibly take what they say and be like, yeah, this lifelong politician or whatever is who's going to end depression. Like, are you kidding me? Like, then no, not at all. I don't get it anymore. I don't know. I give up in politics. I don't even care anymore.
Well, and it's the deal is, especially within the last year, we've found out that there are people, even on the municipal and city town level, that can all but destroy your life. They can all but destroy your business. And so I'm not saying that there aren't people out there who have businesses or restaurants or whatever that have been adversely affected by a global cabal of people who want to destroy you in favor of big corporations. But if you feign to believe that someone as well connected as Donald Trump, or as well connected as Joe Biden, or as sinister as fucking Kamala Harris can save you, or even someone smaller in the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, any of these third party options can save you, you're wasting your time. And I don't say that to be a downer.
To bring it back, it's the same thing with the psychiatrist.
Yeah.
Bring it back. Like, they're not going to save you. You got to save yourself. You got to save your family members.
If you want to be free, if you want to be prosperous, if you want to change your life, that's on you. If you're trusting someone else, you're trusting the wrong person. Yep. And some of you, like, I'm not gonna lie, some of you, if you trust yourself, you're trusting the wrong person. But I mean, I'm not trying to be a dick here. But thinking that global or national solutions can fix your life is almost certainly a way to never improve your life.
Well, it's not even their fault. They're just programmed to think that way. It's just fear, fear, fear. And then you eat up all the fear. And then what's the solutions? Tell me. And then they tell you the solutions. Like, okay, I'm just going to do that solution. And then you block out everything else that contradicts all that. And it's just fear, fear, fear. Bad solution, bad solution. Nobody thinks for themselves anymore. Nobody does anything for themselves. Help your community. Go out and do something to help your community instead of sitting and bitching about how your community is oppressed. Go out and help your community.
Well, yeah, and we talk, and I say we in this part of our audience, we talk about decentralization so much. We talk about how important decentralization is. Yep. But we don't take it down to the necessary part, which is you controlling your own life. I mean, some people do. I'm not saying they don't. But there is something to be said about the technological advances of 3D printers, of cryptocurrency, of the internet as a whole, as alternative media. There is something to be said about starting on the right level. And so many people jump to the global or the national level before they start on the personal level. And all I'm saying, I don't care. There are many roads that lead to Rome. Some say all of them do, apparently. But I recommend that you start on the road outside of your house rather than going to the interstate.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, I'm on a soapbox. I apologize.
I agree. And get back to nature. Nature has always been healing for everyone. So if you're living in the middle of the city and you're feeling depressed all the time, maybe try somewhere else. Maybe if your kids are acting up and you're both working full-time jobs and they're in daycare and public school, whatever, same thing, then maybe move somewhere where it's cheaper and you don't both have to work and you can spend more time with it. You know what I mean? You have to make changes in your life to get what you want. You can't just keep doing the same thing and expect changes to occur.
And as for that, I will say that one of the things that I've heard a lot of millennials say is that it's impossible for a wife to stay home and take care of the kids. And I have made as little as 25 or 30,000 and as much as 90,000. And you
have like 14 kids, right?
I have 5, but yeah, my wife has never had to work because it's my job to make sure that she doesn't have to. And I can't tell you.
We used to do that. I used to do that too. I made 25 grand a year. We managed. We find a way to make it work. And when at first I was the one staying home, and then I went to work, and then we take turns. And right now we both kind of work part time, and we just make enough to survive. Like that's what we need. We need to spend more time with our kids. Unless I don't need a fancy car or anything.
And that's what I'm getting at is I don't care if it's the wife that works or if it's the husband that works or if both work part time. But in my world, in the way I think, my job is to make sure that my kids have a parent at any moment of the day to call on and to get the comfort they need, to get the teaching they need, to get whatever they need. And regardless of if it's part-time, full-time, no job, man or woman, we as a community, as a society, American society, have given away our old people. We've given away our young people, and that needs to stop. My wife comes first, but directly after her comes my kids.
Of course.
And the way that I protect and take care of and love and fight for my wife is to make sure that she's the one who takes care of my kids and not some person who gets paid to do it by the government. And let me just say, I don't want this to start a whole tangent, but it's become abundantly clear in recent years that people, not all of them, but a lot of people who are called or say they are called to work with children also double as predators of children.
Yep.
And I can't chance my children on that.
Well, yeah, I'm not one of these. I mean, I'm known for not being one of these people that are like seeing pedophiles around every corner, but it definitely is. Like, why would you not work in that industry if you were kids? Right. When I was in daycare as a kid, I was those like hooks that come out of the wall, like coat hooks, where there's like a big one on top and a little curved one. I had in daycare, the guy grabbed me by the shoulders and slammed me against the wall into one, and it had big bruises all on my back.
And
daycare. You know?
I'm not saying that all people who are called to take care of children are bad, but I will say that there are bad people.
If you have to, if there's a single parent household and there's no other way, whatever, of course, you got to have somebody to watch it. But it's also, we lost the multi-generational household, which as much as I complain about my mother-in-law, whatever, she, you know, if we both have to do things and there's a little overlap, you know, we have somebody here to watch, you know,
and that's good.
That's one thing we lost. Yeah.
Well, and that's a point that I've brought up previously with Jessica on our earlier shows, is the fact that, like I've said, we've given up our young people, we've given up our old people. And so Hillary Clinton, of all people, said that it takes a village to raise a child. And she's not wrong in the very pure fact of what she said. But her underpinnings were government. But the vast majority of human history have been tribes and families. Tribe is a special word for family.
Yep.
And so it does take a tribe to raise a child. And I think we've lost that. But I do think we've also hit 2 hours. So
yeah,
I'm sorry I've kept you this long, Chris.
I've had to pee since like 15 minutes in, so.
But I do think that for our listeners' sake and for your bladder's sake, we should wrap it up. So I have 2 questions. Actually, I have 3. I'll give you 3. One being the one that I like to put Jessica on the spot, which is she is a diviner of pizza. So if you were to order a pizza right now, what pizza would you order? And Jessica will tell you what that says about you as a person.
Pepperoni, extra cheese, peppers and onions.
That is literally the perfect pizza.
Thank
so
you.
I don't often say this, but you have actually landed on the exact perfect ingredients for pizza.
What else do you need?
Yeah.
What else do you need?
Yeah. You're basically like a superhuman. Good job.
There we go. I already do that, but thank you.
So let me, the next question is the staple of the show, which we've said it differently over time, but what is something right now, could be personal, could be global, could be city, state, whatever level, what is something right now that gives you hope and motivation for the future? What's the silver lining?
The amount of people getting into homesteading and creating their own food and homeschooling their kids and things like that. There's just it's a whole movement. It's not right or left. Like most of the people that we hang out with that are homeschooling, homesteader type people are all like left and right, and we all get along. And it's because we all recognize that it's not about Pelosi or Trump or whatever. It's like about being able to provide for your family, whether it's your education or your child rearing or you growing your own food, having chickens or whatever. You know?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I do like to, like I said, this show, a lot of it's about hope. It's about the idea that we can move on, we can rebuild, we can make something good out of what, because there are a lot of depressed people around here. But my final and most important question for you, and I can ask you this because you're in a group chat with me, is what is your favorite thing about me?
Probably your majestic mane.
I'm saying. You said mane. You didn't say beard.
No, mane. Like the whole thing, because it's all really a mane. It's like a lion thing at this point. You should cut it you should cut it so it doesn't come below your beard, so it just all like blends together. Maybe braid it together with your beard.
Like tease it out so that it goes
come down
big.
and then braid them both together. No.
Yes.
That's probably
I fully endorse this. Though you will lose your powers if you cut your hair. This is well documented.
I'm gonna have to disappoint you here. I'm not going to cut my hair. Maybe I'll talk my wife into braiding it into my beard.
Yeah,
we'll see what happens there.
Leave it in there. Yeah, make it
But I want to say, Chris, you're a joy on Twitter. I was put into that group chat by Cotton kind of randomly after I talked to him about coming on the show, and it never happened. But like, I don't know if any of the other guys in the group chat besides Pilar and Whip are listening to this, but you guys I was kicked off of Facebook, the group that I created the little family that I created on Facebook was kicked off 3 days before the election. And I was in that, I think, slightly before that. But you guys are the best part of Twitter for me, because in that group we get to innovate, we get to talk.
I wouldn't have come back to Twitter. I wouldn't have come back to Twitter if it wasn't for that group chat. That group chat and my friends Seth and Spencer and Mike, like that I hang out with, and another group chat on Keybase, they all have gotten banned on Twitter or whatever. But if it wasn't for those group chats, like I probably wouldn't have used my phone that much, to be honest.
But I want to say, thank you for the glasses. Thank you for coming on the show and for talking to us. I'm sure we didn't hit as much as you may have wanted to.
Okay.
But I enjoyed talking to you, and I hope people enjoyed listening to us. With that, all I have to say for you, I think, unless you have something else you want to say, is if people want to find you, you're on Twitter at Chris Amidon.
Yeah,
don't he used to have thousands of followers.
Well, I'm gonna.
I couldn't care less. No, I don't care. Twitter's a shithole. Leave Twitter. Just leave Twitter instead. Instead of put that, just put leave Twitter forever.
You're the mushroom guy. I know you.
Well, the mushroom and the DMT guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so beyond
this whole time I did not connect you to that Twitter
you didn't even know it was the same guy?
No.
So it's funny.
With you on there. I was mutuals with you on there. Yeah.
So what's funny though
with me again?
Is how often I book something, and Jessica's like, yeah, that's a good idea, let's do that. But then she gets into the show.
It's obvious she didn't even listen to it. She's like, whatever.
This is a person that
she's I'll talk to anybody. Yeah, exactly.
I will though. Like, I'm really friendly. You should see me in a line at a grocery store. It's a mess. I'm the person who talks to people in line. Everybody hates me.
I actually went to Publix the other day, and I have like this whole text thing I could post that on Twitter. And I was like, everybody's talking to me all of a sudden. Like, just this one day, I don't know if I like looked handsome or something, but like all these old women were talking to me, and like employees were, and everybody was getting this conversation. I was like, what is going on? It's so weird for me because I never talked to anybody. I don't know. So.
I think it's because you're handsome. I think that's what it is. But with that, I have my list of nonsense to mention, where to follow us and all of that. So I'm going to go through that. And then I'll do the outro. So upcoming episodes.
While you're doing this?
You can go pee. You can log out. Whatever you want to do. I'm happy with. So coming up next week, we have
go drain his mushroom.
Harley, aka at Rebel Scumahon on Twitter, who she has a project called Cryptid Bartender, which I think is a great situation for us. But next week we're going to be talking cryptids with Harley. Following that, we're talking to a man named Chris Baker. His organization is called Inc. 180. His whole deal is he is a tattoo artist. He still does that. But on the side, his ministry as a Christian is he covers up tattoos of sex trafficking victims who have like the barcodes and other essentially brands of people who sold them. And that's really cool. He also covers up gang tattoos and stuff like that.
I think that dog is barking at you, by the way.
After that, we have our good friend Kim from Lesbertarian come on to talk about Stoicism in a more philosophical conversation. And then finding out after that, we have Nick Ashley from The Individualist. You may know him from Twitter as wearing a Burger King crown on the Fakertarians podcast. I have no fucking idea what we'll talk to him about, but I don't want it to be about the boring stuff. So I'll figure that out before we get there. But beyond that, follow us on Rockfin. That's where if we do early episodes like we did last week with Kate from Burials and Beyond, or the week before that with Allie, if you want to see earlier released content, live content, rockfin.com/themadOnes. We are on Patreon. If you want to help us keep the lights on, keep the shirts flowing out to our guests, which have been put on pause. I'm so sorry. I lost my job. But beyond that, so patreon.com/themadOnes. On Twitter, I am at Cam Harless, which I am now public again. Please don't make it so that I lose this possible job. I would be so heartbroken. If you want to follow Jessica, that's at SoupCanarchist on Twitter. We have t-shirts, we have hoodies, we have tank tops, we have a shirt with a chihuahua with large balls on it. You can't find it at this link, but it's there.
I'm not responsible for any of these t-shirts, by the way.
If,
just letting you know.
If that's something you want. But you can go to wearethemadOnes.com/store. WearethemadOnes.com has all of the audio.
Wait, that's not true. That. The hookers built this country is mine.
It's true, and it's on that link. If you want to listen to it, any podcatcher, wearethemadOnes.com. If you're not watching this right now on YouTube, it's youtube.com/themadOnes. We're also on Odyssey, which just search for it. There's not a good link for that. I can't fix that. I tried.
We come right up when you search the Mad Ones.
Yeah. But beyond that, if you want to listen to any of the other shows that I edit, if you want to listen to other good shows in general, typically centered around the concept of human liberty, mlganetwork.com. That's all I've got for you. Chris, you have anything you want to say to the poor audience that's lived through this entire ordeal?
Nope.
Awesome. And so with that, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching.
Thanks for having me.
And as always, don't get arrested for something stupid.